What if I told you the family that owned this ranch for 150 years didn't lose it? They were ordered to sell it. In February 2020, Marion died. She was the fourth generation to run the Four Sixes, 266,255 acres of Texas, a footprint larger than the city of Dallas. A town of a few hundred people sits inside the fence line. Her will instructed that the whole thing go on the market, not a division, everything. The cattle, the horses, the brand, the name. And the strangest part isn't that they sold, it's what the buyers didn't get. To understand that, you have to go back to a cattle deal in North Texas in 1868, because the beginning of this ranch looks nothing like the ending. A 19-year-old named Samuel Burke Burnett bought 100 head of cattle at Denton Creek. He didn't do it alone. His father helped him into the deal, and the banker who financed much of what came later, M.B. Lloyd, eventually became his father-in-law. That's why generations afterward, horses raised on this ranch still carry an L brand on the left shoulder. A financing arrangement from the 1800s is still being burned into hide today. Now, here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. There's a story that Burnett won the ranch in a poker game holding 4 sixes. It's a great story. It's a legend. The cattle he bought in 1868 already wore the 6666 brand, and he negotiated the rights to it as part of the purchase. The family has said the true origin of the mark is simply unknown. So picture what he actually owned that year. 100 cows, a second-hand name, and no land, not 1 acre. That isn't a poetic way of saying he started small. It's the central problem of his entire working life. Because in 1868, cattle didn't need deeds, they needed grass. And grass, in that part of the world, belonged to whoever reached it first. Burnett expanded the only way anyone could. He rented the range. Some of the best of it lay north of the Red River in Indian Territory, and using it meant dealing directly with the Comanche and the Kiowa. Quanah Parker made grazing arrangements with a number of Texas cattlemen, and Burnett was one of them. Those dealings were real. They lasted for years, and by every account, they rested on more than a signature. They were also completely outside his control. Think about what that means as an operation. Your entire feed supply, the thing keeping thousands of animals alive through a summer, sits on ground you don't own, under agreements a government office can end. There's no drought plan for that. There's no fence you can build. When those leases came under pressure, a rancher with no deeded land had thousands of cattle and nowhere legal to put them. Burnett had standing by then. He knew Theodore Roosevelt personally, well enough that a Texas town carries the name Burke Burnett because of it. He took his case to Washington more than once. But influence buys time. It doesn't buy grass. So around the turn of the century, he made the decision that built everything that follows. He stopped renting and started buying. In 1900, he bought the 8 ranch at Guthrie in King County, and soon after, the Dixon Creek Ranch up in the Panhandle, roughly 350 miles away. And I want you to sit with how questionable that looked at the time. This is not lush country. King County averages around 22 inches of rain a year. That's enough to hold native grass and nowhere near enough to grow much else. Dry country means it takes a lot of acres to carry 1 cow, which means the only way to make it pay is to own an enormous amount of it, which means carrying enormous debt against land that produces very little per acre. Anyone who pointed that out at the time was right. On cattle alone, the math does not close. It still doesn't. That single arithmetic problem is the pressure running underneath all 150 years of this story. And it's the reason the ending looks the way it does. He bought it anyway. Then he spent the next 20 years discovering that owning the land was only the first bill. Here's what nobody puts on the postcard. A ranch this size is mostly a water project. Cattle walk to water and then chew and trample the ground around it into bare dirt. So you don't just need water, you need it scattered across the whole property in dozens of places permanently. That's why the Guthrie division today is divided into 119 pastures, served by 29 windmills and 18 solar wells. Every one of those is a machine standing in open country with no shade and no shelter. Every one of them eventually breaks. That's the real hidden cost of an empire like this. Not cowboys, pumps, pipe, and float valves, checked by somebody who has to drive an hour to reach them. Then, in 1917, Burnett did something that looks on its face like pure vanity. He built a stone house on a hill above Guthrie, hauling the material in by wagon. It runs 13,280 square feet, 13 bedrooms, 13 baths, 2 kitchens. The reported cost was around $100,000, which in that era, in that location, was an almost unbelievable sum. Roosevelt stayed there, so did Will Rogers, so did Quanah Parker. But look at what that building announced. A man who spent his early career grazing land he didn't own had just set something permanent in the middle of it. The house wasn't the point, permanence was. The country up north had a different opinion. Dixon Creek takes its name from Billy Dixon, the buffalo hunter and scout who put the first dugout home on the high plains there in 1874, which tells you roughly how much shelter that landscape offers. In 1918, a panhandle blizzard killed 2,000 cattle on that division. 2,000 animals, not sold, not shipped, dead in the snow over a matter of days, on ground the family owned outright. That's the part of ranching at this scale nobody films. You can hold the deed to every acre and still lose a year of work to 3 days of weather. And then, 3 years after that, the ground underneath the house did something nobody had planned for. On May 2nd, 1921, the first oil well in the Texas Panhandle was completed on the 4/6's Dixon Creek Ranch. 2 years later, the first rotary drilling rig ever used in the Panhandle went to work on the same property. Stop here, because this is the hinge of all 150 years. Burnett bought Dixon Creek to feed cattle. What he had actually bought was a mineral estate. The grass on top was the business everybody could see. The value underneath was the business that made the grass survivable. A second major field came in at Guthrie in 1969, and it was still being developed decades later. Burnett Oil Company grew up alongside Burnett Ranches, two arms of the same family. You'd think that settled things permanently. It settled money. It created a different problem entirely, and that one took a century to go off. Burnett died in June 1922. The way he handed the place down is genuinely strange. The bulk of his estate went to his daughter, Anne Valiant Burnett, in a trusteeship established for a grandchild who had not yet been born. That child arrived in 1938. Her name was Anne too, Anne Burnett Windfor, later Anne Marion. Read that again. A cattleman wrote a legal instrument in the early 1920s designed to deliver a ranch intact to a person who did not exist. And it worked. That's the remarkable part. The 4/6's came through the Depression hole while neighbors went under. The woman who ran it next, Anne Burnett Tandy, Miss Anne to the ranch people, became nationally known as a breeder and judge of horses, and by 1936 The ranch was running something like 20,000 Hereford cattle across its divisions. But a trust built to prevent division has one hard consequence. It keeps the asset whole, and an asset that can never be divided eventually has to be handed to exactly one person or sold. Hold on to that. It's the answer to the question in the title, and it takes another 90 years to arrive. Meanwhile, the ranch was quietly becoming 4 separate businesses wearing one brand. The first was cattle. Herefords, for most of the century, Black Angus in the modern era, run as a commercial cow-calf operation. Modern herd estimates vary by source and by year. Published accounts range from roughly 4,000 mother cows to as many as 7,000, which tells you something about how hard it is to pin down a private operation from the outside. The second was oil and gas royalty, money that arrives whether or not it rained. The third was horses, and this is where the 4 Sixes stopped being simply a large Texas ranch. Miss Ann brought in stallions like Grey Badger II and Hollywood Gold. The race-bred line that followed included Dash for Cash, Special Effort, and Streakin' Six, names that mean nothing if you've never been to a quarter-horse sale and mean everything if you have. That program eventually justified something you would not expect to find in a county of a few hundred people. Full equine veterinary and reproductive facilities west of Guthrie, with a laboratory, a surgery room, foaling boxes, recovery stalls, and a breeding area. 95 miles from Lubbock, because a mare in trouble at 2 in the morning cannot be driven 2 hours. The fourth business was the brand itself. 4 Sixes on a hide is a mark of provenance, and provenance sells. Underneath all of it sat something almost no operation this size has: continuity of management. In its entire history, the Guthrie headquarters has had only a handful of managers. One of them, George Humphreys, started on the ranch in 1918 at the age of 18, was made manager in 1932, and guided the place through the Depression and the worst cattle prices anyone had seen. One man, 2 generations of owners. That isn't sentiment, that's institutional memory about which pasture holds up in a dry year and which water tank goes bad first, and you cannot buy that on the open market. Now here's where the story turns against the family. It isn't weather and it isn't cattle prices. Anne Marion took over in 1980 after her mother's death. She ran Burnett Ranches and chaired Burnett Oil, and under her the empire got smaller. Holdings that had once exceeded 1/3 acres were trimmed. The Triangle Ranch and other parcels were sold after 1980, leaving the 2 core properties and a small third division in the Panhandle. That is not failure. That is what happens to inherited land in a country with estate taxes, in a business where the asset is worth a fortune and earns a modest living. Those 2 facts fight each other every year, and the fight gets worse every time land values rise. So how did it hold together? Here's the reversal, and it undoes most of what you think you know about this place. The cattle were never the valuable part. Look at the horses first. Cattle you sell once. A stallion you sell access to season after season, and the buyer takes home a foal carrying your program's name. The 4 Sixes wasn't only producing beef, it was producing genetics sold into a national market from a headquarters most people couldn't find on a map. Then look under the ground, because this is the number that reframes everything. At Dixon Creek, the family had years earlier gifted half the minerals to Texas Christian University. Half given away. And the half the ranch retained was still averaging just over $2 million a year in royalty in the 3 years before the sale. At Guthrie, royalty ran closer to 4 or 500,000 a year, and in 2018, Burnett Oil leased the minerals under roughly 140,000 acres of that division. Now set that against the carrying cost. Property taxes on Dixon Creek came to about $120,000 a year, a little over $1 an acre. Sit with the shape of that. A family gave away half of one property's mineral estate, and what was left still covered the tax bill on that division many times over. Every cowboy you've seen photographed on this place is real. The work is real. The beef is real. But the machine keeping the machine alive was never only beef, and anyone selling you the pure cowboy version of this story is quietly leaving out the part that paid for it. Let me shrink this back down, because numbers this size stop meaning anything. The Guthrie division runs roughly 20 miles one way and 12 the other. Inside that fence line sits the town of Guthrie, the county seat of King County, with the ranch essentially wrapped around the community. Population estimates vary. The sale listing put it near 350, and other accounts put it closer to 125. Either way, everyone who lives there would fit inside a high school gym. Now take one windmill in one of those 119 pastures on a July afternoon when the average high sits at 99 degrees. If it quits, cattle start walking. Walking cattle in that heat lose weight, and weight is the only product you have. Somebody has to get out there and fix it, and that drive is measured in hours, not minutes. Then look at the headquarters itself, because it isn't a house with barns around it. The compound includes 2 bunkhouses, a supply house, the loft barn, horse sheds, a shop, equipment and feed buildings, a round pen, pilot's quarters, and roughly 20 employee houses. There's a 3,600 square foot enclosed hangar and a lighted asphalt landing strip 6,000 feet long. A private runway on a cattle ranch sounds like luxury until you remember where you are. A ranch this spread out either flies or it waits, and waiting costs cattle. That runway is infrastructure, same as the windmills. One more detail, and it's the one that surprised me most. According to the sale listing, commercial hunting was never allowed on the property. Marion hunted it herself and brought family and friends out, but the ranch never sold access. Think about what that means. On most large Western properties, hunting leases are reliable income, often the difference between a profitable year and a loss. The 4 Sixes left that money on the table for decades. Wildlife on that ground was managed as part of the place rather than as a product, and the listing noted how unusual that is at this scale. Which brings us to the contradiction. Sitting in the middle of all this, private ownership at this size preserved something real. Native pasture that was never plowed, water points maintained for a century, a working culture most of Texas has lost. It also meant that several hundred square miles of estate and the tax base of an entire county sat inside one family's estate plan, one employer, one landlord, and I mean that literally, because those 20-odd houses at headquarters belong to the ranch. Where you work and where you sleep are the same decision made by the same owner. So when the 4th generation died, the question wasn't sentimental. It was structural. Who takes this? And the answer is quieter and stranger than the title suggests. Nobody was forced out by debt. There was no foreclosure, no collapse, no drought that finally broke them. Anne Marion's will directed that the ranching operations be sold. She had one daughter, Anne Windy Phillips Grimes, and a granddaughter after that. The broker who handled the sale, Sam Middleton, has said Marion told him 4 or 5 years before her death that all the ranches would be sold when she was gone. He says he asked her about Windy. He says her answer came back as a question. Why would she want to burden her daughter with that obligation? Burden. That single word undoes the myth. Because everything Burke Burnett built to keep this ranch whole, the trust, the mineral estate, the indivisible package, had turned into something no one person could reasonably inherit and run. 250,000 acres, a workforce housed on the property, a horse program with a national reputation, an oil relationship, a brand, a town. You don't hand that to someone, you hand them a life sentence or you sell it. So in late 2020, the listing went up. The Guthrie Ranch alone was priced at $192,202,200, about $1,350 an acre, including a quarter of the minerals along with the solar and wind generation rights. All three divisions together were listed at roughly $341 million, with some reports putting the combined figure near $348 million. Livestock and equipment were priced separately, so those numbers would track the market rather than the calendar. Now notice that mineral figure because it answers the question I left hanging at the start. The buyers did not get everything underneath. Half of Dixon Creek's minerals had gone to a university generations earlier. Of what the family still held, only part conveyed. The oil that carried this ranch through the 20th century did not entirely go with the land. On January 21st, 2022, the sale closed, the first time in the ranch's history. The buyer was a group led by the screenwriter and producer Taylor Sheridan, the man behind Yellowstone. Middleton has described it as a turnkey deal, and he meant that almost literally. The three ranches, half the minerals as they stood, the cows, the horses, the rolling stock, the tractors and trucks and trailers, the furniture in the big house, the art on its walls, the brand, the name. A buyer could take the keys and start working cattle the next morning without moving a thing. Even the price is disputed. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported $192.2 million, which, you'll notice, is exactly the list price of the Guthrie division by itself. Other coverage put the number above $320 million. The parties haven't publicly settled the question, and I'd be careful with anyone who tells you they know for certain. What's verifiable is what's there now. The ranch still runs cattle. The horse program still runs. The 266,255 acres are still counted and operated as one unit. And the new owner's other business is telling stories about ranches, a phenomenon real estate analysts now openly call the Yellowstone effect, credited with driving a surge of buyer interest in Western ranch land and, with it, higher prices for the neighbors. That last part matters more than it sounds. Rising land values are wonderful if you're selling. If you're a family 2 counties over trying to pass a working operation to a son or daughter, a higher appraisal is just a bigger tax bill on ground that still only grows grass. The sale of the 4 sixes didn't only end one dynasty, it made the arithmetic harder for everybody still trying to hold one together. For 150 years, this place survived because one family kept choosing not to break it apart, funded by oil they found by accident and horses they bred on purpose, run by managers who stayed for decades. That continuity is over. What replaced it is capital from an industry that profits from the image of exactly this kind of place. The iron still goes on the hide the same way it did in 1868, when a 19-year-old bought 100 cows that were already wearing it. Everything about who holds that iron has changed. So here's what I keep turning over. A working ranch and a story about a working ranch look identical from the road. The question is, what happens the first time they want different things?